Introductions to the Law of One. Introduction to Book 1. Don Elkins. This book is an exact transcript from tape recordings of 26 sessions of an experiment designed to communicate with an extraterrestrial being. We started the experiment in 1962 and refined the process for 19 years. In 1981 the experimental results of our efforts changed profoundly in quality and precision. This book is simply a report of the beginning of this latter phase of our work. Since our experimental work began, and even before we officially formed a research group, there was considerable confusion about the nature of our research. I would like to state that I consider my point of view to be purely scientific. Many readers of this material have used as a basis for its evaluation a previously assumed philosophical bias which has ranged from what I would call objectively scientific to subjectively theological. It is not the purpose of our research group to attempt to do anything other than make experimental data available. Each reader will undoubtedly reach his own unique conclusion about the meaning of this body of data. In recent years there has been much controversy about phenomena that were apparently incompatible with accepted methods of scientific research. This included such things as UFOs, mental metal bending, psychic surgery, and many other seemingly miraculous happenings. To prove or disprove any of these alleged phenomena is certainly not properly the task of the casual observer. However, most of the public opinion that has been generated with respect to these events seems to be the product of quick and superficial investigation. After almost 30 years of research and experimentation in the area of so-called paranormal phenomena, I must recommend extreme caution in reaching a conclusion. If it is possible to make money, gain notoriety, or have fun from perpetrating a hoax, then someone usually does it. Consequently, paranormal or psychic areas are prime targets for the trickster, and the careful researcher usually has to observe copious amounts of garbage data in order to find a possible embedded gem of truth. This is especially true of Philippine psychic surgery and the large area of spirit communication in general. It seems to me that the presently accepted scientific paradigm is less than adequate. It is my opinion that our present natural philosophy is a very special case of a much more general case yet to be unveiled. It is my hope that our research is in the direction of this discovery. After assimilating several million words of alleged extraterrestrial communication, it is also my opinion that this book and the subsequent volumes of the raw material contain the most useful information that I have discovered. As a result of all of this delving into the rather confusing subjects of ufology and parapsychology, I, of course, have formed my current opinion of how things really are. This opinion may change at any time as I become aware of future information. This book is not intended to be a treatise of my opinion, so I will not attempt to defend its validity. The following is the best guess I can make about what we think we are doing. Only time will tell as to the accuracy of this guess. Our research group uses what I prefer to call tuned trance telepathy to communicate with an extraterrestrial race called Ra. We use the English language because it is known by Ra. In fact, Ra knows more of it than I do. Ra landed on Earth about 11,000 years ago as a sort of extraterrestrial missionary with the objective of helping Earthman with his mental evolution. Failing in this attempt, Ra retreated from the Earth's surface but continued to monitor activities closely on this planet. For this reason Ra is highly informed about our history, languages, etc. Probably the most difficult thing to understand about Ra is its nature. Ra is a sixth-density social memory complex. Since Earth is near the end of the third density cycle of evolution, this means that Ra is 3 evolutionary cycles ahead of us. In other words, Ra's present state of evolution is millions of years in advance of Earthman's. It is not surprising that Ra had difficulty communicating with Earthman 11,000 years ago. The same problem still exists in our present enlightened time. At this writing we have completed over 100 sessions of experimental communications with Ra. This approximate 300,000 words of information has suggested to me a possibly more adequate scientific paradigm. Only time and future will serve to validate and expand this paradigm. Ufology is a large subject. A reasonable amount of background material would swell this introduction to book length. Therefore, The remainder of this introduction does not attempt to cover every portion of this diverse and growing field of study but is instead an accounting of some of the pertinent parts of our research from our beginnings to the present day and the raw contact. I've asked my longtime research associate, Carla L. Ruckert, to tell our story. Carla L. Ruckert, I first met Don Elkins in 1962. To me he was a fascinating character, an unusual combination of a college professor and psychic researcher. He had done well over 200 hypnotic age regressions, probing past the birth experience and investigating the possibility that reincarnation might not be just possible but the way things really are. In 1962 I joined an experiment that Don had created in order to start to test a hypothesis which he had developed with the help of Harold Price, an engineer for Ford Motor Company. Price had acquainted Don with some information which Don found quite interesting. Its source was allegedly extraterrestrial. Its content was largely metaphysical and seemed to be in line with all that Don had learned up to that point. Within this material, instructions were given for creating the means whereby to generate further material from this same source without the necessity of actual physical contact with extraterrestrials. Don's hypothesis was that this phenomenon might be reproducible, so he invited a dozen of his engineering students to join in an experiment with the objective of achieving some sort of telepathic contact with a source similar to that of the Detroit groups. I was the 13th member, having become interested in the project through a friend of mine. In those early days of contact attempts, with Don attempting strenuously to keep the situation controlled, months went by with what seemed to be remarkable but puzzling results. As we sat meditating, according to the instructions, everyone in the group except me began to make strange noises with their mouths. For my part, my main difficulty during those first 6 months was keeping a straight face and not laughing as the sessions gradually became a raucous symphony of guttural clicks, slurps, and tongue flops. The nature of the experiment changed drastically when the group was visited by a contactee from Detroit. The contactee sat down with the group and almost immediately was contacted apparently by telepathic impression saying, "Why don't you speak the thoughts that are on your minds? We are attempting to use you as instruments of communication, but you are all blocked through fear that you will not be speaking the proper words." Through this instrument, Walter Rogers of Detroit, Michigan, the group was instructed to refrain from analysis, to speak the thoughts and to analyze the communication only after it had been completed. After that night a month had not gone by before half the group had begun to produce information. By the time a year had passed, all in the group except me were able to receive transmissions. The speech was slow and difficult at first because each individual wanted a precise impression of each and every word, and, in many cases, wanted to be completely controlled for fear of making an error in transmission. Nevertheless, this was an exciting time for the original group of students who began this strange experiment. In January of 1970 I left my position as school librarian of a 13th-grade private school here in Louisville and went to work for Don full-time. By this time he was convinced that the great mystery of being could best be investigated by research into techniques for contacting extraterrestrial intelligences and was determined to intensify his efforts in this area. During this period, Don worked on many peripheral areas of UFO research, always trying to put the puzzle pieces together. One of the great puzzle pieces for us was the question of how UFOs could materialize and dematerialize. The phenomenon seemed to posit a physics which we had not yet grasped and a being capable of using this physics. Don had gone to many seances by himself before I joined him in his research and had very systematically crossed each name off his list. He was looking for a materialization manifestation, not one he could prove to anyone else, but one which he, himself, could believe. It was his feeling that the materializations which seances manifest were perhaps of the same or similar nature as the materializations of UFOs. Therefore, his reasoning went, viewing personally the mechanism of a materialization and a dematerialization in a seance would enable him to hypothesize more accurately concerning UFOs. In 1971, after I had been on several fruitless materialization medium searches with Don, we went to a seance held by the Reverend James Tingley of Toledo, a minister of the Spiritualist Church. We went to see relevant Tingley's demonstrations 4 times. Before the first time, Don had casually examined relevant Tingley's modest meeting place inside and out. It was built of concrete blocks, like a garage. There were no gadgets either inside or outside the building. I did not know that Don was doing this. I merely sat and waited for the demonstration to begin. This last point is an important one when talking about psychic research of any kind. Don has always said that one of my assets as a research associate is my great gullibility. Almost anyone can play a joke on me because I do not catch on quickly. I have a way of taking things as they come and accepting them at face value and only afterwards analyzing what has occurred. This gullibility is a vital factor in obtaining good results in paranormal research. A desire for proof will inevitably lead to null results and voided experiments. An open mind, one willing to be gullible, leads its possessor to a kind of subjective and personal certainty which does not equal proof as it cannot be systematically reproduced in others. However, this subjective knowing is a central part of the spiritual evolution to which Ra speaks so compellingly in this volume and which we have researched for many years now. The séance began, as do all the séances I have attended, with the repetition of the Lord's Prayer and the singing of hymns such as Rock of Ages and I Walked in the Garden. There were approximately 26 people in this bare room, sitting on straight chairs in an oval circle. Reverend Tingley had retired behind a simple curtain and was also seated on a folding chair. Of the occurrences of the first séance, perhaps the most interesting to me was the appearance of a rather solid ghost known as Sister. She wished to speak to me and to thank me for helping Dawn. Since I had never had a close friend that was a nun, I was quite puzzled. It was not until much later, when Dawn was flying us home, that he jogged my memory, and I realized that his mother, who had died before I met her, was known in the family as Sister. Both in that séance, and in the following séance, when Dawn and I were called up, we could see the ghost-like figures of the materialized spirits quite clearly. I, with impaired night vision, could still make out features, but Dawn could see even the strands of hair on each entity. During the second séance an especially inspiring master appeared suddenly and the room grew very cold. He gave us an inspirational message and then told us that he would touch us so that we would know that he was real. He did so, with enough force to bruise my arm. Then he told us that he would walk through us so that we would know that he was not of this density. This he did, and it is certainly an interesting sensation to watch this occur. Lifting his arms, he blessed all those in the room, walked back through us, and pulled down in a small pool on the floor and was gone. In 1974 Don decided that it was time for me to become a more serious student of the art of channeling. He argued that 12 years of sitting and listening to inspirational messages were enough, and that it was time for me to take some responsibility for those cosmic sermonettes, as Brad Steiger has called them, that I so enjoyed. We began a series of daily meetings designed to work intensively on my mental tuning. Many of those who were coming to our meditations on Sunday nights heard about the daily meetings and also came, and within 3 months we generated about a dozen new telepathic receivers. During the process of these intensive meditations we instituted our long-standing habit of keeping the tape recorder going whenever we started a session. Using some of the large body of material that our own group had collected, I put together an unpublished manuscript, Voices of the Gods, which systematically offered the extraterrestrial viewpoint as recorded by our group meetings. In 1976, when Don and I began to write Secrets of the UFO, published by a private printing and available by mail, this unpublished manuscript was of great help. During this period one other thing occurred that was synchronistic. Don and I, who had officially gone into partnership as L. Research in 1970, had written an unpublished book titled The Crucifixion of Esmeralda Sweetwater in 1968. In 1974, Andrija Puharich published a book with Doubleday titled Yuri. The book is the narrative of Dr. Puharich's investigation of Uri Geller and their unexpected communication with extraterrestrial intelligences. The form of contact was quite novel in that first some object like an ashtray would levitate, signaling Dr. Puharich to load his cassette tape recorder. The recorder's buttons would then be depressed by some invisible force and the machine would record. On playback, a message from an extraterrestrial source would be present. Don was impressed by the large number of correlations between these messages and our own research. The book is fascinating in its own right, but it was especially fascinating to us because of the incredible number of distinct and compelling similarities between the characters in the real-life journal of Dr. Puharich's work with Yuri and the supposedly fictional characters in our book. We went to New York to meet Andrija after phoning him, sharing our long-standing research with him and comparing notes. As our genial host came out onto his front veranda to welcome us, I stopped, amazed, to look at the house. Even the house in which he lived in the country north of New York City was a dead ringer for the house his fictional counterpart had owned in our book. The identity was so close that I could not help but ask, Andrija, what happened to your peonies? When I wrote about your house I saw your driveway circled with peony bushes. Puharich laughed. Oh, those. I had those cut down 3 years ago. In 1976 we determined to attempt an introduction to the whole spectrum of paranormal phenomena which are involved in the so-called UFO contactee phenomenon. This phenomenon is not a simple one. Rather, it demands a fairly comprehensive understanding and awareness of several different fields of inquiry. Since the raw material is a direct outgrowth of our continuous research with alleged extraterrestrial entities, it seems appropriate here to review some of the concepts put forward in that book in order that the reader may have the proper introduction to the mindset, which is most helpful for an understanding of this work. The first thing to say about the UFO phenomenon is that it is extraordinarily strange. The serious researcher, as he reads more and does more and more field research, finds himself less and less able to talk about the UFO phenomenon in a sensible and down-to-earth way. Well over half the people in the United States have said in nationwide polls that they believe that UFOs are real, and television series and motion pictures reflect the widespread interest in this subject. Yet, there are few researchers who would pretend to be able to understand the phenomenon completely. Dr. J. Allen Hynek has called this quality of the research the high strangeness factor and has linked the amount of high strangeness with the probable validity of the case. Some of the people who see UFOs have the experience of being unable to account for a period of time after the encounter. The UFO is seen and then the witness continues on with his or her daily routine. At some point, it is noticed that a certain amount of time has been lost that cannot be explained. Very often these same people report a type of eye irritation, or conjunctivitis, and sometimes skin problems. In extreme cases, a person who has lost time and seen a UFO will develop a change of personality and find it necessary to contact the aid of a psychologist or a psychiatrist for counseling. Dr. R. Leo Sprinkle, professor of psychology at the University of Wyoming, has been conducting yearly meetings of people who have experienced this type and other types of close encounters. It was in psychiatric therapy that one of the more famous of the UFO contact cases, that of Betty and Barney Hill, was researched. The Hills had seen a UFO and had lost some time but managed to reduce the significance of these events in their minds enough to get on with their daily lives. However, both of them, over a period of months, began experiencing nightmares and attacks of anxiety. The psychiatrist to whom they went for help was one who often used regressive hypnosis for therapeutic work. He worked with each of the couple separately and found, to his amazement, that, when asked to go back to the source of their distress, both Mr. and Mrs. Hill related the story of being taken on board a UFO while on a drive, medically examined, and returned to their car. Don and I have, through the years, investigated quite a few interesting cases, but, perhaps a description of one will suffice to show some of the more outstanding strangenesses which are quite commonly associated with what Dr. Hynek calls close encounters of the third kind. In January 1977, merely 18 or so hours after our witness's UFO experience, we were called by a friend of ours, hypnotist Lawrence Allison. Lawrence had been contacted by the witness's mother, who was extraordinarily concerned about her boy. We made an appointment with the witness, a 19-year-old high school graduate employed as a truck driver. He had seen a craft about 40 feet long and 10 feet tall, which was the color of the setting sun, at very low altitude, approximately 100 to 150 feet. The craft was so bright that it hurt his eyes, yet he could not remove his gaze from it. He experienced a good deal of fear and lost all sense of actually driving his car. When he was directly underneath the UFO, it suddenly sped away and disappeared. When the boy arrived home, his mother was alarmed because his eyes were entirely bloodshot. He was able to pinpoint his time lost since he had left precisely when a television program ended and since he noticed the time of his arrival home. He had lost 38 minutes of his life. The young man wished to try regressive hypnosis to find his lost time. We agreed, and, after a fairly lengthy hypnotic induction, the proper state of concentration was achieved and the witness was moved back to the point at which he was directly underneath the UFO. Suddenly he was inside the ship in a circular room which seemed at least twice as high as the entire ship had seemed from the outside. He saw 3 objects, none of which looked human. One was black, one was red, and one was white. All looked like some sort of machine. Each entity seemed to have a personality, although none spoke to the boy, and he endured a kind of physical examination. After the examination was finished, the machines merged into one and then disappeared. The ship bounced and rocked briefly, and then the witness was back in his car. If you are interested in reading a full account of this case, it was published in the April Bulletin, in Flying Saucer Review, in the International UFO Reporter, and in the MUFON UFO News. One of the most familiar aspects of close encounters is the experience that our witness had of seemingly understanding what aliens were thinking and feeling without any speech having taken place. Telepathic communication has long been the subject of much experimentation and, although there is much interesting research, there has never been a definitive study proving good telepathic communication. Consequently, the field of research into telepathy is still definitely a fringe area of psychic research. However, anyone who has ever known that the phone was going to ring, or has experienced the knowledge of what someone was going to say before it was said, has experienced at least a mild example of telepathy. Don states that telepathic experiments between himself and Uri Geller have been totally successful. However, since they were deliberately not performed under rigorous scientific control, they could not be included in any orthodox report. It is, in fact, our opinion that the rigorous controls have a dampening effect on the outcome of any experiment of this type. L Research, which, since 1980, has been a subsidiary of the Rock Creek Research and Development Labs, to this day holds weekly meetings open to anyone who has read our books. We still tend to insert the word alleged before the words telepathic communications from extraterrestrials because we know full well that there is no way of proving this basic concept. However, the phenomenon certainly exists. Millions of words in our own files and many millions of words in other groups' files attest to this fact. Regardless of the more than occasional frustrations involved in paranormal research, the serious researcher of the UFO phenomenon needs to be persistent in his investigation of related phenomena, such as mental metal bending. The physics which Rod discusses, having to do with the true nature of reality, posits the possibility of action at a distance as a function of mind, specifically the will. Uri Geller has been tested in several places around the world, including the Stanford Research Laboratories, and an impressive list of publications concerning the results of those tests exists, most notably the Geller Papers and, as an offshoot of this metal bending phenomenon, the Iceland Papers. One example which shows the close connection between UFOs and mental metal bending happened to us in July of 1977, after our book, Secrets of the UFO, was published. We had been interviewed on a local program and a woman in a nearby town had heard the broadcast and was very interested in what we had to say since her son, a normal 14-year-old boy, had had a UFO encounter. He had been awakened by a whistling sound, went to the door, and saw a light so bright that it temporarily blinded him. Again, as is often the case, it was the same night that people nearby also saw lights in the sky. The woman wrote us a letter, and Don immediately called and asked her permission to speak to her son. After questioning the young man to Don's satisfaction, Don asked him to take a piece of silverware and tell it to bend without touching it in any firm or forceful way. The 14-year-old picked up a fork, did as Don suggested, and the fork immediately bent nearly double. The boy was so startled that he would not come back to the phone, and his mother was unable to convince him that there was any value in going further with the experiments. She had enough foresight to realize that in the small town in which he lived, any publicity that might come to him on the subject of metal bending would be to his detriment, since the people of his small town would react in a most predictable way. Nevertheless, the link is there quite plainly. John Taylor, professor of mathematics at King's College, London, offered his book, Superminds, to make his careful experimentations on metal bending available to the world. Taylor used only children, about 50 of them, and for a great portion of his experiment he used metal and plastic objects sealed in glass cylinders which had been closed by a glass blower, so that the children could not actually touch the objects without breaking the glass. Under this controlled circumstance the children were still able to bend and break multitudinous objects. As you read the raw material you will begin to discover why it is mostly children that are able to do these things, and what the ability to do this has to do with the rest of the UFO message. Since I am not a scientist, at this point I will turn the narrative back to Don, whose background is more suited to this discussion. Don, a persistent question when considering psychic demonstrations is, how does the paranormal event happen? The answer may well lie in the area of occult theory, which is concerned with the existence of various planes. After death an individual finds himself at one of these levels of existence spoken of in connection with occult philosophy, the level of being dependent on the spiritual nature or development of the person at the time of his death. The cliché that covers this theory is a heavenly birds of a feather flock together. When a ghost materializes into our reality, it is from one of these levels that he usually comes for his earthly visit. In general, it is theorized that a planet is a sort of spiritual distillery, with reincarnation taking place into the physical world until the individual is sufficiently developed in the spiritual sense that he can reach the higher planes of existence, and is no longer in need of this planet's developmental lessons. Most of this theory was developed as a result of reported contact and communication with the inhabitants of these supposedly separate realities. I have come to believe that these levels interpenetrate with our physical space and mutually coexist, though with very little awareness of each other. A simple analogy, to which I've referred before, is to consider the actors in two different TV shows, both receivable on the same set, but each show being exclusive of the other. This seems to be what we experience in our daily lives, one channel or density of existence, being totally unaware of the myriad entities occupying other frequencies of our physical space. The point of all this is that our reality is not ultimate or singular, it is, in fact, our reality only at the present. Many of the UFO reports display ample evidence that the object sighted has its origin in one of these other realities or densities, just as do the materialized ghosts. I would like to emphasize that this does not in any way imply their unreality, rather, it displaces the UFO's reality from ours. I'm saying the equivalent of Channel 4 on the TV is equivalent to but displaced from Channel 3 on the same TV. If you were told to build a scale model of any atom using something the size of a pea for the nucleus, it would be necessary to have an area the size of a football stadium to contain even the innermost orbital electrons. If the pea were placed at the center of the 50-yard line, a small cotton ball on the uppermost seat in the stands could represent an electron of the atom. There is very little actual matter and physical matter. When you look at the stars in the night sky, you would probably see something quite similar to what you would see if you could stand on the nucleus of any atom of solid material and look outward toward our environment. To demonstrate an electron to you, a physicist will probably show you a curved trace of one on a photographic plate. What he probably does not tell you is that this is second-hand evidence. The electron itself has never been seen, only its effect on a dense medium can be recorded. It is possible, of course, to make accurate mathematical calculations about what we call an electron. For such work we must know some data on magnetic field strength, electron charge, and velocity. But since a magnetic field is caused by moving charges, which in turn are empirically observed phenomena, we find that the entire mathematical camouflage obscures the fact that all we really know is that charged particles have effects on each other. We still don't know what charged particles are, or why they create an action at a distance effect. Senior scientists would be the first to agree that there is no such thing as an absolute scientific explanation of anything. Science is, rather, a method or tool of prediction, relating one or more observations to each other. In physics, this is usually done through the language of mathematics. Our scientific learning is a learning by observation and analysis of this observation. In the sense of penetrating the fundamental essences of things, we really do not understand anything at all. A magnetic field is nothing but a mathematical method of expressing the relative motion between electrical fields. Electrical fields are complex mathematical interpretations of a totally empirical observation stated as Coulomb's law. In other words, our forest of scientific knowledge and explanations is made up of trees about which we understand nothing except their effect, their existence. To a person unfamiliar with the inner workings of modern science, it may seem that modern man has his environment nicely under control and totally figured out. Nothing could be further from the truth. The leaders of science who are researching the frontiers of modern theory argue among themselves continually. As soon as a theory begins to receive wide acceptance as being a valid representation of physical laws, someone finds a discrepancy, and the theory has to be either modified or abandoned entirely. Perhaps the most well-known example of this is Newton's F equals ma. This attained the status of a physical law before being found to be in error. It is not that this equation has not proven extremely useful. We have used it to design everything from a moon rocket to the television picture tube, but its accuracy fails when applied to atomic particle accelerators like the cyclotron. To make accurate predictions of particle trajectories, it is necessary to make the relativistic correction formulated by Einstein. It is interesting to note that this correction is based on the fact that the speed of light is totally independent of the speed of its source. If Newton had penetrated more deeply into the laws of motion, he might have made this relativistic correction himself, and then stated that the velocity correction would always be of no consequence, since the velocity of light was so much greater than any speed attainable by man. This was very true in Newton's day, but is definitely not the case now. We still tend to think of the velocity of light as a fantastic and unattainable speed, but with the advent of spaceflight, a new order of velocities has arrived. We have to change our thinking from our normal terrestrial concepts of velocities. Instead of thinking of the speed of light in terms of miles per second, think of it in terms of Earth diameters per second. The almost unimaginable 186,000 miles per second becomes an entirely thinkable 23 Earth diameters per second, or, we could think of the speed of light in terms of our solar system's diameter and say that light would speed at about 2 diameters per day. Einstein's assertion that everything is relative is so apparent that it has become a cliché of our culture. Let us continue being relativistic and considering the size of natural phenomena by considering the size of our galaxy. If you look up at the sky on a clear night, nearly all of the visible stars are in our own galaxy. Each of these stars is a sun like our own. A calculation of the ratio of the number of suns in our galaxy to the number of people on planet Earth discovers that there are 60 suns for each living person on Earth today. It takes light over 4 years to get from Earth to even the nearest of these stars. To reach the most distant star in our own galaxy would take 100,000 light years. These calculations are made using the assumption that light has a speed. This may be an erroneous assumption in the face of new theory, but its apparent speed is a useful measuring tool, so we use it anyway. So we have a creation in which we find ourselves which is so big that at a speed of 23 Earth diameters a second we must travel 100,000 years to cross our immediate backyard. That is a big backyard, and it would seem ample for even the most ambitious of celestial architects, but in truth this entire galaxy of over 200 billion stars is just one grain of sand on a very big beach. There are uncounted trillions of galaxies like ours, each with its own billions of stars, spread throughout what seems to be infinite space. When you think of the mind-boggling expanse of our creation and the infantile state of our knowledge in relation to it, you begin to see the necessity for considering the strong probability that our present scientific approach to investigating these expanses is as primitive as the dugout canoe. The most perplexing problem of science has always been finding a satisfactory explanation of what is called action at a distance. In other words, everyone knows that if you drop something it will fall, but no one knows precisely why. Many people know that electric charges push or pull on each other even if separated in a vacuum, but again no one knows why. Although the phenomena are quite different, the equations which describe the force of interaction are quite similar. For gravitation, F equals gmmr2, for electrostatic interaction, F equals kqqr2. The attractive force between our planet and our Sun is described by the gravitational equation. The attractive force between orbiting electrons and the atomic nucleus is described by the electrostatic interaction equation. Now each of these equations was determined experimentally. They are not apparently related in any way, and yet they both describe a situation in which attractive force falls off with the square of the distance of separation. A mathematical representation of an action at a distance effect is called a field, such as a gravitational or electric field. It was Albert Einstein's foremost hope to find a single relation which would express the effect of both electric and gravitational phenomena, in fact, a theory which would unify the whole of physics, a unified field theory. Einstein believed that this was a creation of total order and that all physical phenomena were evolved from a single source. This unified field theory, describing matter as pure field, has been accomplished now. It seems that the entire situation was analogous to the solution of a ponderously complex Chinese puzzle. If you can find the right key turns among so many wrong ones, the puzzle easily falls apart. Dewey B. Larson found the solution to this problem, and the puzzle not only fell apart, but revealed an elegantly adequate unified field theory rich in practical results, and, like a good Chinese puzzle, the solution was not complex, just unexpected. Instead of assuming 5 dimensions, Larson assumed 6, and properly labeled them as the 3 dimensions of space and the 3 dimensions of time. He assumed that there is a 3-dimensional coordinate time analogous to our observed 3-dimensional space. The result of this approach is that one can now calculate from the basic postulate of Larson's theory any physical value within our physical universe, from subatomic to stellar. This long-sought-after unified field theory is different because we are accustomed to thinking of time as a net-dimensional, as a stream moving in one direction. Yet once you get the hang of it, coordinate time is mathematically a more comfortable concept with which to deal. Professor Frank Meyer of the Department of Physics at the University of Wisconsin presently distributes a quarterly newsletter to scientists interested in Larson's new theory, which explores perplexing questions in physical theory using Larson's approach. I was interested in testing Larson's theory and made extensive calculations using his postulate. I became convinced that his theory is indeed a workable unified field theory. I had been pondering several interesting statements communicated through contactees by the alleged UFO source prior to discovering Larson's work in the early 60s. Although the people who had received these communications knew nothing of the problems of modern physics, they were getting information which apparently was quite central to physical theory. First, they suggested that the problem with our science was that it did not recognize enough dimensions. Second, they stated that light does not move. Light is. Larson's theory posits 6 dimensions instead of the customary 4, and finds the pure field, which Einstein believed would represent matter, to move outward from all points in space at unit velocity, or the velocity of light. Photons are created due to a vibratory displacement in spacetime, the fabric of the field. Furthermore, the contactees were saying that consciousness creates vibration, this vibration being light. The vibratory displacements of spacetime in Larson's theory are the first physical manifestation, which is the photon or light. According to the UFO contactees, the UFOs lower their vibrations in order to enter our skies. The entire physical universe postulated by Larson is dependent on the rate of vibration and quantized rotations of the pure field of spacetime. The contactees were suggesting that time was not what we think it is. Larson suggests the same thing. The UFOs were said to move in time as we move in space. This would be entirely normal in Larson's time-space portion of the universe. Lastly, and perhaps most importantly, the contactees were receiving the message that the creation is simple, all one thing. Larson's theory is a mathematical statement of this unity. For more information about Larsonian physics, contact the International Society of Unified Science, a group of scientists and philosophers currently promoting Larson's theory. Their address is International Society of Unified Science, Frank H. Meyer, President, 1103 15th Avenue, South.E, Minneapolis, Minnesota 55414. What physicists have never before considered worth investigating is now increasing at a very rapid rate. Action at a distance, apparently as a result of some type of mental activity, seems repeatedly the observed effect. When Uri Geller performs on TV, mentally bending metal and fixing clocks, there are often many kids who try to duplicate Uri's tricks. Sometimes the kids succeed. The number of children that can cause bends and breaks in metal and other materials just by wanting the break or bend to occur is increasing daily. As previously mentioned, John Taylor, professor of mathematics at King's College, reports in his excellent book, Superminds, on the extensive tests run in England on several of these gifted children. If the gel-arising children continue to increase in numbers and ability, the 1980s will see such fantasies of TV as My Favorite Martian, I Dream of Jeannie, and Bewitched becoming a part of reality. With controlled, repeatable experiments like those conducted by Taylor and by the Stanford Research Institute in the United States, we begin to have good solid data available for study. Gradually we are moving into a position from which we can begin to create a science of magic, for that which has been called magic through the ages is now being performed at an ever-increasing rate, primarily by children. In the future, we may even find this magic added to the curriculum of the sciences at universities. In point of fact, the present disciplines of chemistry, physics, etc., are still basically magic to us, since we are still in the position of having no ultimate explanation of causality. Carla, one of the concepts most central to the system of study which comes out of research into the contactee messages offered by alleged UFO contact is the concept of the immortality of our individual consciousness. There is a long mystical tradition extending back far beyond biblical times, which posits a type of immortal soul. St. Paul in his epistles has distinguished between the human body and the spiritual body. Long before St. Paul's century, Egyptian priests had the concept of the Ka and posited that this Ka, or spiritual personality, existed after death and was the true repository of the essence of consciousness of the person who had lived the life. Egyptians, of course, made very elaborate arrangements for life after death. If life after death is posited as a probability, one may also posit life before birth. Any mother who has more than one child will testify to the undoubted fact that each child comes into his life or incarnation already equipped with a personality which cannot be explained by environment or heredity. After all the factors of both have been accounted for, there remains a unique personality with which the child seems to have been born. Each child has certain fears which are not explainable in terms of the fears of the parents. A child, for instance, may be terrified of a thunderstorm. The rest of the family may be perfectly comfortable during such a storm. Another child may be extraordinarily gifted at the playing of an instrument when neither parent nor any relative as far back as the parents can remember had musical ability. This brings us back to the serious consideration of reincarnation. According to the alleged UFO contact messages, reincarnation is one of the most important concepts to be grasped, for through it the universe functions in order to advance the evolution of mankind. This evolution is seen to be not only physical but also metaphysical, not only of the body but also of the spirit, and incarnations are seen in this system of philosophy to be opportunities for an individual to continue his evolution through numerous and varied experiences. Although perhaps 2/3 of the world's population embraces, or is familiar with a religious system which posits reincarnation, Those of us of the Judeo-Christian culture are not as familiar with this concept. Nevertheless, Don's early investigations seemed to indicate that reincarnation was a probability and that incarnations contained situations, relationships, and lessons which were far more easily understood in the light of knowledge of previous incarnations. One succinct example of this relationship, which some are fond of calling karma, is that of a young boy, who requests that his name not be used, who in this life had experienced such intense allergies to all living things that he could not cut the grass, smell the flowers, or, during the blooming season, spend much time at all outside. Under hypnotic regression he experienced in detail a long life in England. He had been a solitary man whose nature was such as to avoid contact with any human being. He had inherited a fairly large estate and he spent his life upon it. His one pleasure was the very extensive garden that he maintained. In it he had his gardeners plant all manner of flowers, fruits, and vegetables. After the life had been discussed, and while the lad was still in trance, hypnotist Lawrence Allison asked the boy, as he often did, to contact what is loosely referred to as his higher self. He had the boy ask his higher self if the lesson of putting people first and other things second had been learned. The higher self said that indeed the lesson had been learned. The hypnotist then had the boy ask the higher self if this allergy could be healed, since the lesson had been learned and the allergy was no longer necessary. The higher self agreed. The hypnotist then carefully brought the boy out of the hypnotic state and walked over to his piano on which was placed a magnolia. As magnolia blossoms will do, it had dropped its pollen on the polished surface of the piano, and the hypnotist scraped the pollen onto his hand, took it over to the boy, and deliberately blew the pollen directly at the boy's nose. "How could you do that to me?" exclaimed the boy. "You know how allergic I am." "Oh, really?" asked the hypnotist. "I don't hear you sneezing." The boy remained cured of his allergy. When we attempt to consider our relationship with the universe, we begin to see that there is a great deal more in heaven and earth than has been dreamed of in most philosophies. It is an unbelievably gigantic universe, and if we have a true relationship to it we must, ourselves, be more than, or other than, our daily lives seem to encompass. In the raw material a good deal of information is discussed concerning our true relationship with the universe, but it is good to realize that we do have a long tradition of work upon what may perhaps most simply be called the magical personality. Magic is, of course, a much misused term and is mostly understood as being the art of prestidigitation, or illusion. When one sees a magician, one accepts the fact that one is seeing very skillfully performed illusions. However, there is a study of the so-called magical personality which suggests that there is a thread which runs through our daily lives which we can grasp, and, using that thread, remove ourselves from time to time into a framework of reference points in which we see reality as being that of the spiritual body, that personality which exists from incarnation to incarnation and indeed since before the world was. By working upon this magical personality, by interiorizing experience, by accepting responsibility for all that occurs, by carefully analyzing our reactions to all that occurs, and by eventually coming to balance our reactions to all that occurs so that our actions and our environment are generated within the self and are no longer simple reactions to outward stimulus, we strengthen the so-called magical personality until we are able to have some small claim to the art of causing changes in consciousness at will. This is the classic definition of magic. Each time that a person sustains an unfortunate situation and reacts to it by not giving anger for anger or sadness for sadness but instead offering compassion and comfort where none was expected, we strengthen that thread of inner strength within us and we become more and more associated with a life that is closely related to the organic evolution of the universe. It is some sense of the wholeness or organic nature of the universe which best informs the student of the UFO's purposes in being here. They have been here, by many accounts, for thousands of years. At least UFOs have been mentioned, along with many other strange sights, in the annals of all early histories including the Bible. Modern-day interest in UFOs can probably be fairly accurately dated from Kenneth Arnold's historic sighting over Mount Rainier in Washington. Another early and historic sighting, also by an extremely reliable witness, is coincidentally connected with Don Elkins, and so I would choose the Mantell case of January 7, 1948, instead of the Kenneth Arnold case of June 24, 1947, for discussion. Thomas Mantell had trained as a pilot and had flown missions in Africa, Europe, and, most notably, D-Day. In 1947 he was out of the Air Corps and had started the Elkins-Mantell Flying School on Bowman Field in Louisville, Kentucky. In 1947 Don Elkins was a youthful student in this school. At about 2 o'clock in the afternoon on January 7, 1948, the Kentucky State Police called Fort Knox and reported to the MPs there that they had sighted a circular flying object moving rather quickly in their area. The MPs called the commanding officer at Godman Field at Fort Knox, and through due process the Flight Service checked with Wright Field in Ohio to see if there were any experimental aircraft which could explain the sighting. Wright Field had none flying. Meanwhile, the tower at Godman Field, Fort Knox, had already sighted this disc-shaped object, both visually and on radar, and had made a report which was relayed quickly to the commanding officer. As it happened, 4 F-51s were in the area en route from Marietta, Georgia, near Atlanta, to Louisville, Kentucky. Since they were already airborne, the commanding officer at Godman Field decided to contact the lead pilot and request that he investigate the UFO. The lead pilot was Captain Thomas Mantell. Mantell was given a radar vector from Godman Tower and moved towards the UFO. He sighted the object and stated that it was traveling slower than he was and that he would close to take a look. Then Mantell informed the tower that the object was now above him, that it appeared to be metallic, and that it was tremendous in size. None of the F-51s, including Mantell's, was equipped with oxygen. The other pilots leveled off at 15,000 feet. Mantell kept climbing. That was the last transmission from Captain Mantell. Minutes later there was a telephone call stating that a plane had crashed. It was Captain Mantell's. His body lay near the wreckage. I could spend the length of the book attempting to give you a sketchy introduction to the thousands and thousands of sightings like Captain Mantell's that involve irrefutably puzzling and concrete evidence of something highly strange occurring. There are many radar sightings of UFOs. There is one volume, published by the Center for UFO Studies in Evanston, Illinois, which deals solely with the numerous physical traces that UFOs have left behind, either by irradiating the soil, causing other changes in soil composition, or leaving impressions in the ground. A computer set up by this same organization to carry a program of information regarding UFOs contains well over 80,000 reports, and some things become startlingly clear by the use of UFOCAT, the computer. For instance, it is now possible, if one measures a landing trace from a UFO sighting, to find out from the computer what the probable description of the UFO itself will be. Thus, in a way, the witness is merely confirming what the computer already knows. However, this is an introduction to a book which consists of transcripts of messages of a very precise nature having to do with metaphysics, philosophy, and the plan of evolution, both physical and spiritual, of man on Earth. Consequently, what I propose to do is share with you some of the research material which our group has collected through the years. Since all of these examples come from the same group, we never describe who the receiver may be, as we feel that it is the information that is important rather than the person who is transmitting. According to an entity called Hatan who has spoken with our group and several others for many years, the purpose in being here of at least some of the UFOs that are seen in our skies at this time is much like the purpose that we might have in sending aid to a disaster-stricken or extremely impoverished country. It is a desire to be of service. We have been contacting people of planet Earth for many, many of your years. We have been contacting at intervals of thousands of years those who sought our aid. It is time for many of the people of this planet to be contacted, for many now have the understanding and the desire to seek something outside the physical illusion that has for so many years involved the thinking of those of this planet. The process we are stimulating is one which is self-generating. As more and more of those who desire our contact receive it and pass it on to others, Then those who receive this passed-on information will then themselves be able to reach a state of thinking and understanding sufficiently in tune, shall I say, with our vibrations in order to receive our contact. For this, my friends, is how contacts work. It is first necessary, if the entity is to be able to receive our contact, for him to become of a certain vibration as a result of his thinking. This is greatly speeded by involvement in groups such as this. And then it is finally done through meditation. In other words, the verbal communications given to the entity by the channels such as this one create a system of thought and a desire for spiritual awareness that raises his vibration. We of the Confederation of Planets in the service of the Infinite Creator are very sorry that we cannot step upon your soil and teach those of your people who desire our service. But, my friends, as we have said before, this would be a very great disservice to those who do not desire our service at this time, and we are afraid we would have little effect in bringing understanding even to those who desire it, for understanding, my friends, comes from within. We can only guide. We can only suggest. We are attempting to do this in such a way that the seeking of the individual will be stimulated to turning his thinking inward to that single source of love and understanding, the Creator, that is part of us all. Part of everything that exists, for everything that exists, my friends, is the Creator. We are very privileged to have you join with us in this great service at this time in the history of your planet. For this is a very great time, a great transitional period, in which many of the Earth's people will be raised from their state of confusion to a simple understanding, the love of their Creator. Haton speaks of our desire to seek something outside the physical illusion. What he talks about so persuasively is something that is often referred to by members of what Ra calls the Confederation of Planets in the service of the Infinite Creator as the original thought. This is another term for our word, love, but implies a great deal more. It implies a unity that is so great that we do not see each other simply as close friends, or brothers and sisters, but, ideally, as the Creator, and, as we see each other and ourselves as the Creator, we see one being. This concept is at the very heart of telepathy, and Haton talks about this concept and the original thought in general. At this time I am in a craft far above your place of dwelling. I am at this time able to monitor your thoughts. This, my friends, might seem to some of your peoples to be an infringement, but I can assure you that it is not. Our capabilities of knowing the thinking of the peoples of this planet Earth are not designed in any way to infringe upon either their thinking or their activities. We do not consider the knowledge of the thoughts of others to be an infringement, for we see these thoughts as our own. We see these thoughts as the thoughts of the Creator. My friends, it may seem to you that a thought of a nature other than one of love and brotherhood might be a thought generated not of our Creator. This is not possible, my friends. All thought that is generated by the Creator. All things that are generated by the Creator. He is all things and is in all places, and all of the consciousness and all of the thought that exists is the thought of our Creator. His infinite number of parts all have free will, and all may generate in any way they choose. All of his parts communicate with all of the creation, in his entire and infinite sense. We are not attempting to change the thinking of our Creator. We are only attempting to bring his ideas to some of the more isolated parts for their inspection and appraisal. Isolated parts, I say, my friends, and why should we consider these parts to be isolated? We consider them isolated because from our point of view they have chosen to wander far from the concept that we have found to permeate most of the parts of the creation with which we are familiar. We find, my friends, that man upon planet Earth in his experiences and experiments has become isolated in his thinking and has divorced it from that to which we are accustomed in the vast reaches of creation which we have experienced. I urge you, my friends, to remember what we have brought to you. The next time that you are, shall we say, backed into a corner by the circumstances which prevail within the illusion of your physical existence, remember what you have learned and do not forget what you have worked so hard to obtain. You will choose at any time to alter your needs and desires from within the physical illusion to your being within the creation of the Father. As long as your objectives lie within this physical illusion, it will be necessary for you to be subject to the laws which prevail within this illusion. If your desires can be altered by the application of what you are learning and are lifted in the creation of the Infinite One, then, my friends, you may have a great deal more ability to remove yourself from the corners into which the illusion seems to back you. To some who may read these words, the concepts may seem to be a less than practical and certainly overly idealistic method of discussing what many have called the New Age or the Age of Aquarius. It certainly seems unlikely that an entire planet could go so wrong philosophically, and that beings supposedly more advanced than we would care enough about us to attempt to help us. However, as we look for the heart of the cosmic system of philosophy, we find much that is clear and simple without being simplistic in the least. Much that is ethical without being dogmatic, in short, much that is informative. Here Haton speaks of the nature of reality, which, in the main, seems to have escaped the notice of Earth-man. My friends, man on Earth has become very short-sighted in appreciation of the creation. He does not understand the true meaning of the simple and beautiful life that surrounds him. He does not appreciate its generation and regeneration. He learns that the very atmosphere that he breathes is cycled through the plant life to be regenerated to support him and his fellow beings and creatures, and yet this seems to the vast majority of those who dwell upon this planet to be an exercise in technology rather than one in theology. There is no awareness of the Creator's plan to provide for his children, to provide for their every desire, and to provide a state of perfection. Man on Earth has lost the awareness that is rightfully his. And why, my friends, has he lost this awareness? He has lost this because he has focused his attention upon devices and inventions of his own. He has become hypnotized by his playthings and his ideas. He is but a child in his mind. All of this may be very simply remedied, and man can once more return to an appreciation of reality rather than an appreciation of the illusion created by his mind. All that is necessary, my friends, is that he individually avail himself to this appreciation of reality through the process of meditation, for this process stills his active conscious mind, which is continually seeking stimulus within the illusion developed over so many centuries of time upon planet Earth. Very rapidly, then, he can return to an appreciation of the reality and the functioning of the real creation. This, my friends, is what man of Earth must return to if he is to know reality. This simple thought of absolute love, a thought of total unity with all his brothers regardless of how they might express themselves or whom they might be, for this is the original thought of your Creator. The creation of the Father, then, as Haton calls it, has a very simple nature, a nature in which love is the essence of all things and of all their functions. Yet this real creation obviously is not uppermost in most of our minds because we live in a day-to-day atmosphere to which the Confederation has referred quite often as an illusion. We of the Confederation of Planets in the service of the Infinite Creator have been, for many of your years, aware of many principles of reality. We are aware of these principles because we have availed ourselves to them just as the people of your planet may do. It is possible through meditation to totally reduce the illusion that you now experience that creates the separation, an illusory separation, to what it actually is, a total illusion. We have been continuing to speak to you about meditation. We have spoken to you many times about reality and about love and about understanding, and yet you do not seem to be able to overcome the illusion. The reason for the illusion, my friends, is one that man on Earth has generated. He has generated it out of desire. This illusion is useful. It is very useful for those who would wish to evolve at a very rapid rate by experiencing it and by using it while within it. Many of us who are now circling your planet would desire to have the opportunity that you have, the opportunity to be within the illusion and then, through the generation of understanding, use the potentials of the illusion. This is a way of gaining progress spiritually and has been sought out by many of our brothers. I cannot overemphasize the necessity of becoming able to understand the nature of the potentials within your illusion and then, by self-analysis and meditation, reacting to that in a way that will express the thought that generated us, the thought of our Creator. This was done by the teacher whom you know as Jesus. This man recognized his position. He recognized the illusion. He understood the reason for the potentials within the illusion, and his reaction to these potentials and activities within the illusion was a reaction which was expressing the thought of the Creator, a thought of love. Keep uppermost in your mind that the illusion that you experience is an illusion, that it is surrounding you for the purpose of teaching you. It can only teach you if you become aware of its teachings. It is said that he worked his wonders in mysterious ways. This way may seem mysterious, however, it is the way of spiritual evolvement. There are many souls experiencing the illusion in which you find yourself, however, there are few using this illusion to grow. They are not doing this other than at a subliminal level because they have not availed themselves through their seeking to a knowledge of the possibility of doing this. Once an individual has become aware of the possibility of using the illusion in which he finds himself in your physical world for the progression of spiritual growth, it is necessary that he take the next step and use his knowledge to express, regardless of the potentials which affect him, the love and understanding of his Creator. As you have by now become aware, meditation is always suggested as the best means of attaining understanding, of progressing spiritually, and of understanding the nature of the illusion and the purpose for which you are experiencing it. Each person is involved in an illusion or game in which we may, if we wish, use our consciousness in meditation in such a way as to create a more rapid growth in personal evolution. But how do we bring ourselves to the point at which this process, which often seems very difficult, is grasped and begun? Desire, my friends, is the key to what you receive. If you desire it, you shall receive it. This was the Creator's plan, a plan in which all of his parts would receive exactly what they desire. My friends, often in the illusion which you now experience it seems that you do not acquire what you desire. In fact, the opposite seems to be the case in many, many instances. It is a paradox, it seems, that such a statement should be made and that such apparent results of desire are manifested, and yet we state, without exception, that man receives exactly what he desires. Perhaps, my friends, you do not understand desire. Perhaps this understanding is not within the intellectual mind. Perhaps it will be necessary to spend time in meditation to become aware of your real desire. For, my friends, there is much, much more of you and of the creation than you presently appreciate with your intellectual abilities and your present illusion. It is very difficult for the peoples of this planet to give up their illusion, to give up the preconceived knowledge of what they believe to be cause and effect. However, this is not reality. This is illusion, born of illusion. It is a simple product of the complexity that man upon this planet has generated. Join with us in divorcing your thinking from such complexities and become aware of what has created you, everything that you experience, and everything that is thought. Become aware of your Creator. Become aware of His desire, and when you know this desire you will know your own, for you and your Creator are one, and you are one with all of His parts and, therefore, all of your fellow beings throughout all of the creation. When you know His desire you will feel it. There will be no more confusion. There will be no more questions. You will have found what you have sought. You will have found love, for this is the desire of your Creator, that all of His parts express and experience the love that created you. This may be found simply, in meditation. No amount of seeking within the intellectual concepts of your people, no amount of careful planning or careful interpretation of the written or spoken word will lead you to the simple truth. The Confederation messages concentrate a great deal upon the concept of seeking and of desire, feeling that the will of each entity is absolutely central to each entity's quest for evolution. In fact, they say, free will is at the foundation of the universe. Each entity is conceived not only as being part of one unity but also as being a totally unique part of that unity. Each person's free will is quite paramount and the Confederation's concern is always to avoid infringement upon the free will of any person. Their method of contacting man on earth takes its form from a deep concern for this free will. We do not wish to impose our understanding of truth upon your peoples, and this would be something that we would do if we contacted them directly. We could not help it, for our very utterance of truth would be accepted by many of your peoples as being valid. We do not wish to be thought of as the ultimate representatives of the Creator's truth. We wish to give this to your peoples in such a way so that they may accept or reject this at their own will. This, as we understand it, is a necessary provision in the spiritual evolvement of all mankind, that he be, at some state of his evolution, in a position to accept or reject what is necessary for his evolution. In this way, and only in this way, can he know the truth of the Creator, that single truth that is the creation, the truth of the love of the creation. It must be realized from within. It cannot be impressed from without. We are attempting to stimulate those of your peoples who would be stimulated to seeking this truth that is within them. We have been required by our understanding of our Creator's principle to remain in hiding, for we cannot serve one individual and at the same time do a disservice to his neighbor by proving within his own mind that we exist, for many of those of planet Earth at this time do not desire to believe in or have proof of our existence. For this reason we find it necessary to speak to those who seek through channels such as this one. We find it necessary to give to those who seek that which they seek in such a way that they, for themselves, may appraise its value and accept or reject, on their own terms, those thoughts that we bring, and understand the reality of the creation in which all of us exist. Once the desire to receive this message has been developed, the messages are indeed available, not just from our group but from many so-called contactee or channeling groups around the world. Indeed, you will find little new in the cosmic system of philosophy. Those concepts are basic, profound, and simple. The Confederation has a name for one of the great goals of this system of meditation and study, understanding. Many of your peoples are at this time seeking outside their illusion. To those who seek, we offer our understanding. We do not attempt to say that we have ultimate wisdom. We only suggest that that which we have to offer may be of value, for we have found, in our experience, as we have passed through the same experiences as those of Earth, that there is a most beneficial direction in seeking to serve. We are acting through instruments such as those here tonight to give to those who seek, an understanding. Our presence is meant to stimulate seeking. Through this process, we hope to contact as many of the peoples of your planet as would desire our contact. We hope in the very near future to be able to contact many more of the peoples of your planet, the peoples who would desire understanding. It is difficult to contact those people of your planet because of this, shall I say, mixture of types, but it is well worth our effort if we are able to contact but one. We will continue to act as we do now, speaking through instruments such as this one, until a sufficient number of the peoples of your planet have become aware of truth. We are constantly striving to bring, through many channels of communication, the simple message to the peoples of Earth, the simple message that will leave them with a simple understanding of all that there is, and that is love. But understanding, that understanding which shows us the love of an infinite Creator, is again and again described as being possible far more easily through the processes of meditation than by any other method. There are pieces of information that are of importance and there are pieces of information that are not. Wisdom is a rather lonely matter, my friends. You must accept this truth as you acquire the burden of wisdom. That which you know, you are to be careful of, for what you know in the real creation has power, and that which you desire is all of the direction which that power will be aimed at. But have faith, my friends, in what you know and what you are learning. Feed your faith and your understanding through meditation. The further that you go along this path, my friends, the more meaningful you will find this simple statement, meditate. It begins as a simple process and, little by little, it becomes a way in which you live. Observe it as you progress along your own spiritual path. It is frequently suggested in contactee messages that the state of mind of the seeker has the opportunity of being continuously in a far more pleasant configuration than is the mind of one who is not actively engaged in pursuing a path of self-knowledge and seeking. However, there are other fruits of the path of meditation and seeking which are predictable and which engage the attention of those who channel these messages. It is to be remembered, my friends, that service to others is service to oneself. Notice that we do not say that service is like unto service to oneself. There is no similarity between others and ourselves. There is identity. There is completion and unity. Therefore, That which is felt of a negative nature towards a sheep of the flock is felt towards oneself and is felt toward the Creator. This enters the service which you attempt to give to yourself and to the Creator through service to another and causes a blot or a stain upon the perfect service you would have performed. It must be remembered that each person is a completely free entity whose independence must in no way be shaken and yet whose identity remains one with you. There is only one thing of great importance for you to consider at this time. That is your personal preparation for service. You are to serve your fellow man, and, therefore, it is necessary that you prepare yourselves for this service. This, of course, my friends, is done in meditation. We cannot overemphasize the importance of meditation. Through this technique you will receive answers to all of your questions. It is difficult to realize this, but this is true. All of your questions can be reduced to an extremely simple concept. This you can become aware of in meditation. Once this has been done you will be ready to serve, just as others have served and are now serving upon your planet. Follow their example, spend time in meditation. Qualify yourself to reach out to your fellow man and lead him from the darkness of confusion that he is experiencing back into the light that he desires. One service which the Confederation sources greatly appreciate is that provided by vocal channels which are trained in groups such as the one which we have had in Louisville since 1962. They never suggest in any way that their message is unique or that salvation can only be gained by listening to that message. However, they are aware that there are many who seek that message through sources other than Orthodox religion and classical philosophy. Consequently, they are here to provide a service of making information available and can only perform their service through vocal channels. There are more people upon this planet seeking than there have been in the past. However, many are quite confused in their attempts to seek, and there is a need at this time for many more channels such as this one who can receive directly the thoughts that so many of the people of this planet are seeking. We are attempting at this time to generate greater numbers of proficient vocal channels who can receive our thoughts quite readily. This requires daily meditation. This is all that is required, daily meditation. It is assumed, of course, that as this daily meditation is performed there is a desire for our contact. As one who has participated in meditation groups for many years, may I suggest that individual meditations not include the attempt to contact Confederation sources. It is best to pursue this attempt only in a group situation, preferably a group which contains at least one experienced receiver. And always, whether meditating alone or in a group, I strongly recommend some means of tuning so that the meditation which follows will be at the highest spiritual level possible. This tuning can be accomplished in any way preferable to the meditator. The Lord's Prayer, humming or other singing or chanting, the reading of some inspirational writing, or a careful visualization of the white light of the Creator, are all useful tuning methods. Reincarnation is very basic to the Confederation message. One of the most highly regarded fruits of the meditation and seeking process is the ability of the seeker to penetrate what Ra calls the forgetting process which occurs at the time of our birth into this incarnation so that we might become aware of the lessons which we have to learn during this incarnation. These lessons are always along the lines of how to love better, more fully, more deeply, or with more kindness and understanding. However, each entity has unique lessons. At the time at which each of you incarnated, my friends, each of you was aware that certain lessons, hitherto unlearned, were to be the goals for achievement in this incarnation. If it seems to you that your entire incarnation within this illusion has been a series of difficulties of one particular type, then you are almost certainly aware in some manner of one of your lessons. As you can see, these lessons are not to be avoided. They are to be learned. Further, we must point out to you that when a confrontation in such a lesson has been achieved, that which separates you from understanding is most often your own thinking. Your conscious thinking processes are quite capable of being self-destructive in the sense that they may aid you to avoid the lesson that you wish in reality to learn. Therefore, as you approach a lesson, we suggest that if it is possible to achieve a temporary abeyance of the conscious, analytical processes, then you may return to the problem with a much clearer mentality, ready to learn what you came to this experience to learn, rather than only to avoid what you came to learn. We know how difficult it is to achieve the meditative state at all times, for we have been where you are and we are aware of that particular type of illusion that you call physical. We urge you, therefore, to depend on meditation of a formal kind, then to attempt a semi-meditative state at all times, and, by this, we mean simply to achieve a state of attention so that your destructive impulses are not free to clog your mind completely and keep you from learning the lessons you came to learn. Undergirding all of the lessons that we have to learn about love is the basic concept that all things are one. Meditate upon the complete unity of yourself and all that you see. Do this not once, and not simply in present circumstances, but at all times, and especially in difficult circumstances. For insofar as you love and feel at one with those things which are difficult for you, to that extent will those circumstances be alleviated. This is not due to any laws within our physical illusion, but is due to the law of love, for that body which is of spirit, which is interpenetrated with the physical body, is higher than your physical body, and those changes which you make by love upon your spiritual body will, of necessity, reflect themselves within the physical illusion. All is one, my friends. My voice is now the voice of this instrument, my thoughts are her thoughts. Please believe that the vibration we offer to you is not a vibration of personality, but is a vibration of the Creator. We are also channels. There is only one voice. Within this vibration, we are self-consciously aware that this voice is the voice of the Creator. It is simply a matter of lifting vibrations which are not so self-aware of the Creator. All things will eventually come into harmony in relation to your understanding. Even if the universe for those around you remains disharmonious and difficult, if your mind is stayed upon the unity of the Creator, your own universe will become harmonious, and this is not by your doing but by the simple love of the Creator. From many sources we have heard that we are in the last days of a particular era of evolution. Popular writers of the Christian faith have taken the writings of the Book of Revelations and analyzed them in such a way that it is suggested that the days of Armageddon are near at hand. Scientists have written many books exploring the possibility that unusual planetary configurations such as the Jupiter effect will occur now and in the year 2000, thus enlarging the possibility for Earth changes. Other scientists have examined much evidence indicating that a polar shift by the year 2000 is probable. Prophets such as Edgar Cayce have channeled information having to do with such drastic changes occurring, and in addition, of course, there are many concerns having strictly to do with the man-made potential for planetary devastation. We also have gathered information in our meetings on the subject of Earth changes. There is a season upon your planet which shall be highly traumatic within your physical illusion. The physical reasons for this are varied. Your scientists will spend a great deal of time, while they can, in attempting to catalog and describe each of the conditions which will produce disaster on this physical plane of your planet. That which your scientists speak of is quite so, and will be part of the program which has been predicted by all of those holy works which you have upon the face of the earth. It is not either permissible or possible for us to tell you precisely what events will occur, or when they will occur, due to the fact that the vibration within the mind and heart of the peoples upon your planet is determining and will determine the precise events. There is within the planet Earth a great deal of karma which must be adjusted as the cycle changes, and these things will manifest. Precisely when, and how, we cannot say, nor would we wish to, my friends. For the rain, and the wind, and fire, will destroy only those things which are in what you call the third density of vibration. You may value those things because you cannot imagine what a fourth density existence will be like. We suggest to you that you spend no time concerning yourselves with the effort of maintaining your third density existence after the vibration change to fourth density has been completed. If, within your spirit, your graduation day has come, those things necessary for your emergence into fourth density will be done for you. All will be accomplished by helpers which you must be aware that you have. It is extremely possible that damage will occur to those things which you identify with yourself in the third density. If we may speak plainly, you will observe the valley of the shadow of death. These very words, my friends, have been spoken to you before, and yet you cling to that physical body and those physical surroundings as though your spirit were attached quite permanently to them. May we suggest to you that you can find your spirit neither in your head, nor in your hands, nor in your chest, nor in your legs, nor in your feet, that nowhere can you find your spirit, nowhere can you operate to remove it, nor to aid it. Your spirit resides within a shell. The shell may be removed, but that is no matter. The spirit does not perish. What is the metaphysical meaning of this suggested physical trauma of our planet? The Confederation suggests that the planet itself is moving into a new vibration, a new portion of space and time, which many have called the New Age, but into which we shall not be able to enter unless we have indeed learned the lessons of love which it has been our choice to learn or not to learn for many incarnations. Therefore the Confederation suggests that it is very important to choose to follow the positive path or not to follow it. There is a choice to be made very shortly, and it would be preferable if all of the people of this planet understand the choice that is to be made. It will be difficult for many of the people of this planet to understand what this choice is, because it is a choice that they have not considered. They have been much too involved in their daily activities and their confusion and their desires of a very trivial nature to be concerned with an understanding of the choice that they are very shortly to make. Whether they wish to or not, whether they understand it or not, regardless of any influence, each and every one of the people who dwell upon planet Earth will shortly make a choice. There will be no middle area. There will be those who choose to follow the path of love and light and those who choose otherwise. This choice will not be made by saying, I choose the path of love and light, or I do not choose it. The verbal choice will mean nothing. This choice will be measured by the individual's demonstration of his choice. This demonstration will be very easy for us of the Confederation of Planets in his service to interpret. This choice is measured by what we term the vibratory rate of the individual. It is necessary, if an individual is to join those who make the choice of love and understanding, for his rate of vibration to be above a certain minimal level. There are many now that are close to this minimum level, but due to continuing conditions of erroneous thought that prevail upon your surface, they are either fluctuating around this point or are even in some cases drifting away from the path of love and understanding. There are many whose vibratory rate at this time is sufficiently high for them to travel with no difficulty into the density of vibration that this planet is shortly to experience. At some time in the future, then, something that the Confederation has called the harvest will take place. This concept of the Judgment Day differs from the eschatological one in that the one who judges us is not a God apart from us but the God within us. As a result of this harvest, some will go on to a new age of love and light and will learn new lessons in a very positive and beautiful density, as the Confederation calls it. Others will have to repeat this particular grade of lessons and relearn the lessons of love. Here the Confederation entity, Haton, speaks once again of the harvest and of the Confederation's purpose in speaking through contactee groups. There is going to be a harvest, as you might call it, a harvest of souls that will shortly occur upon your planet. We are attempting to extract the greatest possible harvest from this planet. This is our mission, for we are the harvesters. In order to be most efficient, we are attempting to create first a state of seeking among the people of this planet who desire to seek. This would be those who are close to the acceptable level of vibration. Those above this level are of course not of as great an interest to us since they have, you might say, already made the grade. Those far below this level, unfortunately, cannot be helped by us at this time. We are attempting at this time to increase by a relatively small percentage the number who will be harvested into the path of love and understanding. Even a small percentage of those who dwell upon your planet is a vast number, and this is our mission, to act through groups such as this one in order to disseminate information in such a fashion that it may be accepted or rejected, that it may be in a state lacking what the people of your planet choose to call proof. We offer them no concrete proof, as they have a way of expressing it. We offer them truth. This is an important function of our mission, to offer truth without proof. In this way, the motivation will, in each and every case, come from within the individual. In this way, the individual vibratory rate will be increased. an offering of proof or an impressing of this truth upon an individual in such a way that he would be forced to accept it would have no usable effect upon his vibratory rate. This, then, my friends, is the mystery of our way of approaching your peoples. Another concept that has come out of the many communications from alleged UFO entities is that of wanderers. They are usually service-oriented people, and, as would be predictable, they often have a great deal of difficulty fitting into the planetary vibrations of Earth. Often they have the feeling that they do not fit in or do not belong, but at the same time, very often, these people are possessed of many gifts, in the arts, in teaching, or in the simple sharing of a cheerful and happy vibration, which certainly does not suggest the normal attitude of a simple malcontent. This concept is particularly interesting to many people who will be drawn to the raw material because, according to that material, much of it will be most easily recognized as being useful by wanderers. There are not just a few wanderers on Earth today. Ross suggests a figure of approximately 65 million. They have left other densities and harmonious environments to take on a kind of job that is most difficult and dangerous, for if a wanderer cannot at least begin to pierce the forgetting process that occurs at birth into this density during his or her lifetime on planet Earth, and remember the love and the light that the person was intended to share, the wanderer can conceivably become caught in the third density illusion, collecting what may loosely be termed as karma, and be delayed in arriving again at the home planet until all that is unbalanced in third density in this lifetime has been balanced. When Don Elkins and I wrote Secrets of the UFO in 1976, we devoted a chapter to the concept of wanderers and used material gathered in hypnotic regressions of 3 women who are friends in this lifetime and who, when separately regressed, gave independent and dovetailing stories of their lives on another planet. After that book went to press, we were able to work with a man whom the women had named as being a part of that experience on another planet. This man, who was then a student working towards his master's degree in chemical engineering, was aware of no detail of our research except that we were involved in doing some hypnosis. On May 10, 1975, Don, along with Lawrence Allison, an accomplished hypnotist with whom we had worked often when he lived in Louisville, sat down with our 4th volunteer and proceeded to explore that other world for a 4th time. The information was especially interesting, since all 3 previous regressions had been poetic, and beautiful, but scarcely technical. Our 4th subject had a far different background and was able to see things in a far more accurate and explicit manner. This 4th regression fitted perfectly into the story told by the first 3 subjects. One of the first things that Don and Larry, the questioning went back and forth, asked about was the clothing. Q. How are you dressed? A. In white. Q. White what? A. Loose white clothes. Q. Okay. What's above the waist now? Above the pants? A. Well, it's just like a robe, it's not really a robe but a loose clothing with a sash, like for a belt. Q. And what about on the shoulders? A. Well, it's just short-sleeved. It's warm. This type of robe suggests a monastic or religious order, and questions were asked to attempt to discover some orthodox religious connection on this planet. No connection was found, so the questioners moved on to the name of this other world since the surroundings were not those of Earth, but the young man, normally incisive in his answers, seemed totally unaware of the concept of naming. Q. The name of your planet? A. It's just A. We live there, and I don't see any mountains, but I see. The name? A. I have a child. Q. One child? A. Yeah. Little boy. Q. His name is? A. I just don't have a feeling for names. I have, like, you know when you want somebody, and they know when you want them, sort of. I mean, I just don't have a feeling for names. Not only did their planet seem to lack a proper name, but speech itself seemed to be a far different process, one which we would probably call telepathy. Q. All right, if someone calls to you, what do they call you? A. I just haven't heard anybody speak. I don't know if you have to speak. It seems like kind of a simple life. But there's obviously, well, there was light at my books, so it's obviously mechanized, or perhaps much more than that even. I don't I don't recall people speaking to each other, though. I mean, they seem to, you know. Everybody knows each question. You know what's going on, but I don't really see. It was singing, there was singing, but there wasn't actually people conversing with each other. You just sort of knew, I guess. I'd be sitting on a stone or a bench and they'd be sitting down, and I'm explaining, but I don't really see myself talking to them. The subject, with his engineer's eye, was able to put together the architecture of the place in the way the women had not. All four agreed that the center of the community and its purpose was something that may conveniently be called the temple. Think it's a stone. I guess limestone, but it's whiter, I guess. That's what it's made of. Q. What about the perimeter? Well, there's, from supports from the side or arches up to the ceiling, but it's not a regular dome, it's, well, I haven't seen that kind of dome before. Q. Take a good guess. How far across is that dome? Oh, goodness. It looks like it's 200 feet the long way, and maybe more than that, maybe 250. And, oh, maybe 150 feet wide. It's a huge room, very. Q. Okay. Now, how is it lighted? A just laughs a little incredulously. Really, it's just a glow from the ceiling. I mean, you know, like well, there's, like the area that's light, and then there's darker, like it's been painted, but the paint, that's light. It seems like it's, well, it just doesn't need any light. The room's bright. Maybe it's coming from the windows, but there doesn't seem to be any shadow in the room. Q. What you're saying is that it seems as if the atmosphere in the room is glowing there? Well, yeah, just like it's bright. I don't see any shadows, like if there was a light source. Q. Now I want you to listen inside that big room. What kind of sounds do you hear? Nothing in that room, but they're singing someplace. Q. Very quietly, singing off in the distance? Q. All right. It is, some kind of. It's more like, a kind of choir, a little choir, like. That music, reported by all four subjects, is not like any music we have ever heard. Two of the subjects actually saw the music sparkling in the air and none could accurately describe it. I can't place the words. It's just, you know, like a sort of praise, a sort of, you know, something like you'd hear in a choir. Q. Praise to whom? Well, Q. To God? I'm sure that's who it is, you know, it's sort of a happy thing to do, when people get together and sing. The subject spoke of growing up studying in large books. I see myself sitting over a book and just reading. Q. History? Well, I don't know. Q. Practical work? Science? What do you study? Art? The arts? Just great books, big books. Q. Do you have supervised study in classes or? Well, in the morning there's a teacher, and in the afternoon or in late evening, I study. Q. Is there an examination? No exams. You just want to learn, you want to learn. It's like you can't learn enough. Who were these people? Did they represent an entire planetary population or were they a portion only of that population? If they were a portion, how were they chosen to do this work? After looking at this material, Don and I generated a term by which to call this particular group of people, the clan. Here is one of the questioners on this subject. Q. Nobody has individual homes? Well, no, this big place is their home. This is home. Well, this is one purpose. It's like a school, or a teaching place to teach those that want to learn it in depth, and those that come when they can. But this isn't like a ruling type people, by any means. You know, this isn't. Like the people have to come here. It's not a class system or anything. Meditation played a very large part in the lives of the inhabitants of this other world, or at least those in this clan. There were meditations alone and there were daily group meditations with the entire clan. Well, let's see. I don't see myself there, in different states of consciousness. There are prayerful times, in the morning and at night. You have them in your room, and then you have others before meals, before the morning meal, and then, not, well, briefly before the evening meal, but, when, it was like when the food was brought, but then afterwards it's in a room, like a private sort of devotional, except that you're not, like in meditation. And there are times when the whole group gets together other than meals, just like the whole place is like a family, I would guess. Because, like I said, you don't feel that attached, necessarily, to one person. You feel attached to everybody. They're all, like, in your family. Another function of the clan was to open their great temple from time to time to all of those of the planet who wished to come for spiritual inspiration. The questioners, in attempting to determine just how these large crowds came to fill the temple, happened upon the description of what seemed to be a very large heliport. We discovered later that the vehicle was not a helicopter. However, that is the term that the questioner used here. Okay. Now, the people that leave at that heliport, you have no idea where they go? When I say these ships come, it's not like hordes of people just rushing off and rushing back on or anything. Oh, how should I? You know, it lands there, and the doors open, and the people come out, and people come in. They're allowed to go on the grounds, you know. In other words, this is their place too. But they come as a visitor, sort of, to it. How long do they stay there? A day. The description of the heliport, there's a place, a flat place, like, that's stone, out in front, but I don't see roads coming to it, for it. I see. Like, sort of, like, well, a huge helicopter pad, for instance, but the questioners had to find out what was landing on that large stone area, and so the subject was asked to describe the type of transport that used it. All right. I want you to describe that ship, and what makes it go. I don't. It's like. It seems it's probably a spaceship. But I don't see it coming from space. It sort of, suddenly almost being there, I don't see it like zipping off or coming in, you know, across the horizon or anything. Just describe what it looks like. Yeah, well, it's longer than it is wide, and it's not real thick compared to the length dimensions and the width dimension. It's not spinning when it comes down, because it's a little sort of, like oblong, or it just sort of appears and sets down, you know. I mean, I don't see it actually coming into view from small and getting larger. It is interesting to note the apparent description of materialization and dematerialization implicit in the subject's answer to that question. And so the young man grew in wisdom and in years and told a story of teaching, growing somewhat gray-haired, beginning to teach fewer and more advanced students, and in time preparing to end the incarnation. As the questioners brought the subject back through the death experience in the previous incarnation and forward in time to the experience in which he was at that moment living, they paused with the subject in between incarnations to ask about the purpose this particular wanderer came to Earth to fulfill. The answer that he gave is both provocative and all too scanty. Many of us seek to help this planet of ours in one way or another, and the question is always, how shall we accomplish it? Why are you on Earth? What is the purpose of this life? What do you intend to do here? What were you assigned to do here? It seems like, to help. Helping with what? Something in particular? Something. Have you already helped in this field? Or is the problem yet to come that you are to help with? It hasn't happened yet. What do you anticipate? Just great needs. What would happen to require so much help from you that you know about? Pause. Spiritual growth? Spiritual development? Physical needs? Well, not the. I get the feeling of some people that are lost, you know? Can you help them? This is your mission? I feel like that's what I need to do. This. Help those people. Which people? The ones that are lost. Q. Is this a particular group? A. Number. Q. Just in general. A. Just people. The work I did in early 1976 was to be my last. I had a condition called juvenile rheumatoid arthritis with several complications, one being SLE, commonly known as lupus, since I was 13 when my kidneys had failed. In 1956, the advanced techniques that are available now to those whose kidneys fail were not available. In fact, it was considered a miracle that I survived, but survive I did with the loss of approximately half of each kidney. I consider myself very fortunate to have been able to have had a productive and active physical life for so long with the odds going so far against me. Even now, with the help of exercise, diet, friends, and faith, I feel most blessed. But my activities are limited. The research that Don and I had done up to that point brought us across the knowledge of a highly unusual type of healing, and it was in part my disability which caused us to put ourselves so wholeheartedly into an examination of that type of healing. Psychic surgery bears only a tangential relationship to orthodox surgery and no relationship to orthodox medicine. It is, like all brands of faith healing, impossible to prove, and the natural and standard response, not only from scientists but from any person who has not done any research into the subject, is an automatic turn-off and utter disbelief. This is to be expected. Were it not for many years of research, this would perhaps be our reaction also. However, we, like most who investigate psychic surgery, knew that we had nothing to lose by investigating this possibility. No psychic surgery patient has ever been lost because nothing actually happens to the patient's physical body. It is truly a psychic form of healing. Consequently, we spent some time both in the Philippines and in Mexico taking part in an examination of the possibilities of psychic surgery. This is an example of what the psychic surgeon creates as a manifestation for the eye. It is a Philippine bedroom. The patient is undressed, retaining those garments which may be needed for personal modesty, and lies down on the bed, which may in some cases be covered with a simple shower curtain, usually that one borrowed from the motel bathroom. The healer, a religious man, and one who has often spent 10 or 12 years of his life praying to become a healer walking in the wilderness of the volcanic mountains of Luzon in solitude, enters the room. He carries nothing except perhaps a Bible. Often the healer is accompanied by an assistant who functions as interpreter and, to use a term familiar to our culture, surgical assistant, to use a more accurate term, cleanup man. The healer normally knows very little English. He or she begins by taking the hands and moving them over the body, palms down. We are informed that this is a method of scanning the body just as an X-ray machine would. A site for surgery is then selected, and if the healer is right-handed, the left hand is pressed firmly against the skin. The skin seems to separate and the interior of the body is seen. This manifestation is very real looking, and anyone who has seen a genuine psychic surgeon at work and has not studied the phenomenon carefully will swear that the body has been opened with the bare hands. The right hand then enters this open site and manipulates within the body. In the most interesting case in which I took part, the healer was told that I had arthritis. He scanned my body with the help of his assistant. Then he opened the abdominal cavity and with a very liquid-sounding action pulled gently, but firmly, at what seemed to be organs rather than joints. It was not unpleasant, but, to me, the patient, it was puzzling, as I had no arthritis in my organs. He then removed what seemed to be 3 rather small, long pieces of bloody material, at the center of which was a small piece of hard material. This done, he removed his left hand. The incision vanished without a scar or trace of any kind. The 2 men, in this case, mopped up what had become a fairly considerable amount of blood, rinsed their hands, and then took baby oil and worked it over the abdominal skin, massaging in silence. When I asked what the healer was doing working in the abdominal area, the interpreter relayed my request, and relayed back the information that the scanning had produced the knowledge of 3 cysts upon my right ovary, and the misplacement or dropping of both ovaries which had occurred through years of very active life. The pulling had been to reposition the ovaries so that I would not be in discomfort during menstruation. The removal of the cysts had had the same purpose. Although my gynecologist had diagnosed these 3 small cysts when I was a very young woman, I had never spoken of them to Don Elkins and, indeed, to no one, since such conversation is not fascinating. One other person knew of these cysts, my mother, but she was 12,000 miles away. Upon returning to the United States, I had my gynecologist examine the area and he confirmed that the 3 cysts were no longer palpable. They have remained gone, and the comfort level of my menstrual cycle is correspondingly far better. The massage with baby oil is a very simplified and unostentatious form of magnetic healing in which prayers are offered and a protective light is visualized around the affected area so that healing will be aided. It is Don's and my belief that the opening of the body for the removal of parts, the closing of the body, and the manifestation of the blood and all other materials are materializations of the same type as the materializations of ghosts and the materialization of UFOs. Therefore, we have never made any attempt to preserve specimens of this psychic surgery. We are aware that this does not fulfill the rigors of the scientific method that exists today, but it is our belief that we would find out nothing by looking at the results of such analysis of manifestation. It would seem that a person, no matter how great his desire to be healed, would be nervous and apprehensive, since the opening of the body itself, physical or psychic, seems very traumatic. Once the healer's hands are upon you, a distinct emotional and mental attitude change occurs within every individual with whom I have spoken who has experienced this phenomenon. The psychic surgeons call it the presence of the Holy Spirit. It should be considered part of the phenomenon. In late 1977 and early 1978 we accompanied Dr. Andrija Puharich and his research associates to Mexico City to investigate a Mexican psychic surgeon, a 78-year-old woman called Paquita, who had been practicing for a great many years. The gift had come to her on the battlefield with Pancho Villa's army, and, as in the Philippines, more of her patients were native than were American. The one difference in her technique was the culture from which she came. In the Philippines, psychic healing came from an extremely literal belief in Christianity as taught by Spanish missionaries for 300 years. Christianity was the center of almost every Filipino peasant's life. A large percentage went to Mass daily, and, as Don and I were there during Holy Week of 1975, we were able to watch evidence of the ruthlessly literal type of Christianity that was practiced there. On Good Friday, for instance, there was a great Catholic parade of the cross through the streets of Manila. What was different about this parade was that there was a human being nailed to that cross. Many had vied for that position. The one who had achieved it, when asked for comment, simply replied that he felt very exalted and hoped that they would choose him again the following year. In Mexico, if Christianity is present at all, and it often is, it is an overlay to an extremely strong Indian belief which is harsh and brooding. One brings to mind the memories of the Mayan slaughter of innocents on the steep steps of the Mexican pyramids. Consequently, Paquita used a very dull knife with a 5-inch blade. She passed it around amongst the entire research group watching to see our reactions, especially mine, since I was the guinea pig. Since her operations took place with me lying on my stomach, I cannot give a first-hand account of what occurred, but Don informs me that the knife seemed to disappear 4 inches into my back and was then moved rapidly across the spine. This was repeated several times. Paquita was, she said, working on my kidneys. Again, we made no attempt to conserve evidence as we knew that it would come to nothing. Many have attempted to research psychic surgery by analysis of its products and have found either inconclusive results or null results indicting that psychic surgery is a fraud. In the book, Ergo, by John Fuller, Dr. Puharich's early work with the South American healer of that nickname, psychic surgery, is carefully examined, and for those interested in this unusual subject that book is a good place to begin. I have never had any success in getting any orthodox doctor to test the possible results of this Mexican experience. This is due to the fact that the procedure used to test the kidneys can, if the kidneys are badly enough damaged already, cause the kidneys to go into failure once again, and no orthodox doctor could be expected to take that risk. Dr. Puharich himself was unwilling for me to go through this procedure. With all of its frustrations, investigation into areas in the very fringe of psychic phenomena are most interesting, informative, and rewarding to the researcher who is patient and whose approach to the subject is simply to gather data rather than attempting to prove, step by step, hypotheses about that which he is doing research. In the raw material manifestations of this type of materialization are discussed and the information is quite interesting. Back in the United States, although I could no longer work at the typewriter, I was still able to offer the continuing weekly meditations and to take on advanced students for individual work. In 1978 James Allen McCarty heard about our group, first from a number of people who had meditated at our Sunday night meetings and had gone on to form a light center and nature preserve in Marion County, Kentucky, and then from a 2-hour, call-in radio show that Don and I had done in Lexington, Kentucky. He came up with many people from the Marion County Meditation Group to experience our meditations. After 2 meditations the group as a whole stopped coming, but Jim made the 140-mile round trip almost weekly, beginning in the spring of 1980. Jim had, for many years, been searching for some method of aiding humanity. Born in 1947, and equipped with degrees in business and education, he had studied, in addition, alternative methods for teaching consciousness expansion. Some of this time was spent working with inner-city children, but he began to find a very strong desire to discover a clearer idea of what it was he was seeking. In 1972 he booked a course of study in consciousness expansion called Brain Self-Control with a gruff old mountainman who lived in a log cabin at 10,000 feet in the Rocky Mountains of Colorado. During this course he learned, for the first time, of the possibility of communication with advanced civilization from outer space, not through any man-made means like radios, telegraphs, or electronic gadgetry but through the use of the frontal lobes of the human brain. Since this very central experience was in wilderness country, rocks, pine, and juniper, he decided to search for an equally remote piece of land upon which he could then offer these brain self-control experiences to others. On 132 acres in central Kentucky, with a running creek for an access road, he formed the Rock Creek Research and Development Laboratories and began to work on the subject closest to his heart, the evolution of mankind. He gave several workshops on this subject but found little interest in that area and so returned to a life of homestanding and solitude for the next 6.5 years, growing his own food, meditating, and studying. He was still curious as to what it would be like to be in a clear, two-way communication with advanced intelligent beings, and, thus, he very much enjoyed the meditations with the Louisville group, but he also had previously become interested in work being done in a group in Oregon. In the fall of 1980, he traveled from Kentucky to Oregon to work with this group which was supposedly channeling the same source that Edgar Cayce had channeled in deep trance. However, the learning that he had received from the Sunday night meetings and from the advanced study that he had with me had spoken to his inner seeking, and, seemingly of its own accord, his mind made itself up for him after only 2 months in Oregon. He found that he needed to return to Louisville and work with Don and me. On December 23, 1980, he arrived in Louisville, having traveled 5,000 miles from the woods of central Kentucky to Oregon and back to Louisville. Don and I were endlessly grateful for McCarty's aid. His abilities were extraordinary. He had a grasp of the metaphysical material going back to his college days and he had read extensively through all the intervening years, so he came to this work very informed of our areas of study. He was able to take up the physical part of the research, filing, making notes, transcribing tapes, and carrying on the correspondence that had sorely lapsed since my disability. Jim, always thorough, sold his land. L Research merged with the Rock Creek Research and Development Laboratories, keeping our old partnership name for our publishing arm, purchased a new typewriter, Jim's Fingers, strengthened by 6.5 years of homestanding, overmatched my old electric typewriter, and we settled down to do what? We didn't know. We discussed doing a new book, updating what we had learned in Secrets of the UFO and had blank paper ready to be filled. Jim had begun to do back research in our voluminous files. 3 weeks after he came, the raw contact began. During all the years that I had been channeling, I had always channeled consciously, using my free will to clothe telepathic concepts in my own language. In 1980, a longtime friend and meditation group member, Elaine Flaherty, died a tragically young death. She had had juvenile diabetes and had died in her 30s. I had sat with her for many days in the hospital before she finally left her body, and she had told me several times that she wanted to make sure that her husband, Tom, was made aware that she was all right after her death, for she knew that she was likely to die. She had told Tom, also a longtime meditation group member as well. After her funeral, Tom came to me and asked if I would attempt to get in touch with Elaine. Having been through all too many seances and not having a great deal of personal commitment to the type of communication that one was likely to get from one's physically dead relatives, I was at first reluctant to attempt such mediumship. However, these were my good friends and I could not say no. Tom, Don, and Elaine's and Tom's son, Mike, gathered with me for the first attempt. After some moments of consciously offering myself for the contact with Elaine, I became unaware of the passing of time, and when I awakened, Tom had what sounded like Elaine's voice on tape speaking through me. That was my first experience with trance. I did not know, and to this day do not know, how it occurred. Tom asked once more if I would do this, and again I went into what seemed to be a very deep trance, remembering nothing and hearing what sounded like Elaine's voice on tape after the session. Don stated that if he had heard me from the next room without seeing me, he would have been certain it was Elaine. This work was extremely draining to me, and I asked Tom to accept the fact that I really did not wish to continue being this type of medium. Tom agreed, saying that he had what Elaine had promised and was satisfied. However, only a few days later, while working with an advanced meditation student, Leonard Cecil, I received a new contact, one which I had never had before. As I do in all cases, I challenged this entity in the name of Christ, demanding that it leave if it did not come as a messenger of Christ consciousness. It remained, so I opened myself to its channel. Again I went almost immediately into trance, and the entity, which called itself Ra, began its series of contacts with us. This contact is ongoing, fascinating, and, to me, a source of some disquiet. The person who decides to become a vocal channel in the first place has already taken a step which is, to some people, quite difficult, that is, the willingness to speak the words of one which is not controlled by the self. In free will channeling, it is possible to choose to stop channeling. However, it is also possible to utter complete nonsense because the channel never knows in advance what the next concept will be. I hasten to add that this nonsense has never occurred in my experience, and that the channelings have always made a reasonable amount of sense, and, in many cases, have been quite inspirational. Nevertheless, in a society where you are taught to measure your words with some care, it seems an irresponsible act to simply blurt out that which comes into your mind. When, in order for the contact to occur, trance has to be obtained, the disquiet grows into something close to a near panic on my part. I do not know how the procedure for a trance works, and I am always afraid that in this session nothing will happen. I will remain conscious, and I will receive no contact. Again, this has never happened. Since neither I nor either of the others in our group has any real idea of how to aid me beyond a certain point in achieving a state of trance, there is nothing to be done but simply to move ahead. Don states that, although my state of trance is similar to others he has observed, it is what he would call telepathic reception in the trance state. Although I studied literature in my undergraduate days and was a librarian for many years, reading the material almost always offers me the opportunity to learn a new word or two, and has certainly stretched my mind in the area of science, which in my education was woefully lacking. What concerns me perhaps more than anything else is that someone who reads this material will consider this human being that I am to have some sort of wisdom that Ra certainly has, but that I certainly do not. If this work impresses you, I can only ask that you please make a sharp differentiation in your mind between the words and the medium through which the words come. You would not, for instance, expect the water pipe to be responsible for the quality of the water which runs through it. Certainly all of us in the research group try, through meditation and daily life, to prepare ourselves as best we can for these sessions. Nevertheless, what comes through our group stands on its own and cannot be said to reflect on the wisdom or so-called spiritual advancement of any of its members. As our popular philosophy has it, we are all bozos on this bus. If you have any questions as you read, please feel free to write the Rock Greek group. Its correspondent, Jim, will never ignore a letter, and since he has his own experiences of the sessions themselves to share, he will finish this introduction. Jim McCarty, we are beginners when it comes to knowing how the raw contact occurs, and it has only been through a process of trial and error, session by session, that we have learned more about how to support our instrument, Carla, in the mental, physical, and spiritual senses. We were so excited about the raw contact when it first began that we had 2 sessions per day for days at a time, but we have since learned that this procedure was much too wearing on Carla. We average about 1 session every week to 10 days now, which allows us to prepare for each session with the greater degree of care that seems to be required as sessions accumulate. A great deal of thought goes into the questions which Don asks during each session. Each of us contributes ideas, but the great bulk of the line of questioning is accomplished by Don, since he has the years of experience in investigating the UFO contactee phenomenon necessary to develop the intellectual foundation required in any attempt to fit the diverse pieces of this puzzle together. He also has the intuitive sense that is vital in following the unexpected and profoundly revealing answers that Ra so often gives with further questions, developed on the spur of the moment, to take advantage of the new insights. With the decision made to hold a session the night before the session is to occur, we arise the morning of the session, have a light breakfast, and begin the series of steps which will best aid us in successfully completing the session. I give Carla a half-hour back massage to loosen her muscles and joints before each session because she will have to remain absolutely motionless for between an hour and 45 minutes. Then we meditate so that the harmony we try to produce in our daily lives is intensified, and so that our desires are unified into the single desire to see contact with Ra. We then perform our ritual of protection and cleansing of the room in which the contact will be made and situate Carla in a prone position on the bed, covering her body with a white blanket, her eyes with a white cloth, and hook up the 3 tape recorder microphones just below her chin so that we don't miss any of the session if 1 or 2 tape recorders malfunction. By this time, all that is visible of Carla is her hair flowing down both of her shoulders and her nose poking out of the sea of cloth white surrounding it. As she mentally recites the prayer of Saint Francis, Don is aligning the table which holds the Bible, candle, incense, and chalice of water in a straight line with her head, as recommended by Ra. After Don lights the candle and incense, he and I walk the circle of 1 around Carla and repeats the words which begin each contact. At some point after that, Carla departs her physical body and Ra then uses it to make the words which form the responses to Don's questions. I meditate and send light to Carla for the duration of the session, only taking time out to flip the tapes over as they finish each side. When the session is over, Don waits a few moments for Carla to return to her usually quite stiff body, calls her name a few times until she responds, helps her to sit up, rubs her neck a bit, and gives her the chalice full of water to drink after he and I have filled it as full of our love vibrations as we can. Since Carla has no idea of what has occurred during the session, she is always most curious to know how it went. She has to settle for second-hand bits and pieces of information until I can get the session transcribed from the tapes, which is usually very easy since Ra speaks quite slowly and forms each syllable with precise enunciation. Participating in this communication with Ra has been most inspiring for each of us because of the blend of eloquence and simplicity which characterizes Ra's responses. The information contained in the raw material has been most helpful to us in increasing our knowledge of the mystery of the creation and our evolution through it. We hope that it might also be useful to you. L. Research, Don Elkins, Carla L. Ruckert, Jim McCarty, Louisville, Kentucky, July 7, 1983.